Local, live, America decides. This is a KCTV5 News election special.
I think this is an existential election. It's going to have implications for my children and my 3 grandsons and more to come. So it's critically important that everyone at least voices their vote.
We are just 2 days away now from counting the votes in campaign 2024, and already thousands of ballots have been cast in Missouri and Kansas. Thank you for joining us. I'm Carolyn Long.
And I'm Brad Stevens. Voters on both sides seem to agree on one thing. This is an important election, and so much is on the line. Coming up on Campaign 2024, we're breaking down the races big and small and the issues that'll decide this election, including the ones that'll be on the ballot.
The rationale is essentially you need to let the candidates speak for themselves.
They're all over the airwaves, political ads, making claims about the candidates. But what can you believe? And why can't TV stations refuse to show these commercials that lie?
And what can we expect on election night? Political experts Pete Mundo and Sly James are looking into their crystal ball and telling us what has and hasn't worked on the campaign trail. So let's start at the very top of the ticket. This one will be on everyone's ballot.
In the race for president of the United States, Republican Donald Trump is seeking a second term in the White House after losing in 2020. While Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris asked voters for a promotion to the top job after her boss shocked the political world and dropped his bid for re-election after a poor performance in the first debate. Entering now into the final days, this race is as close as they come.
The winner will need 270 electoral votes. The experts are putting 19 states plus D.C. and Nebraska's 2nd district in Harris's column. Now, that would give her 226 electoral votes. In Trump's column, 24 states plus Maine's 2nd district, putting him at 219. That includes 10 electoral votes from Missouri and 6 from Kansas. So that means 7 states will decide who ends up in the White House. Here they are. The biggest prize is Pennsylvania, which has only backed the losing candidate twice since 1972. So whoever wins that state will have the upper hand. Harris's shortest path to 270 is Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Trump could get to 270 by winning Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. Now, this race could ultimately come down to a few voters in those swing states.
Yeah, the key demographic shifts every 4 years. KCTV5 Washington Bureau correspondent Brendan Cullerton is breaking down the trends that could decide who wins in 2024.
Donald Trump hopes to eat into Democrats' advantage with minority voters, while Kamala Harris runs up the score with women voters, as both candidates make last-ditch efforts to win the race. As the race for president heats up, Donald Trump is making the case for minority voters to choose Republicans.
Any African American or Hispanic, and you know how well I'm doing there, that votes for Kamala, you got to have your head examined.
Meanwhile, the Harris campaign is using Barack Obama as a resource. The former president had unprecedented success turning out the black vote.
We have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running.
George Washington University political director Todd Belt says Harris is underperforming President Joe Biden's 2020 metrics when it comes to minorities, mostly because of male voters. But Harris is polling better with women voters than Biden did in 2020. Belt says data shows the gender voting gap between Democrats and Republicans is at about 17%, up from about 5% in recent elections, and female voters are key.
Particularly suburban women. And that's why we've seen Donald Trump go out and try to do a women-only type of question and answer that he did. There's a lot of women for whom the issue of abortion is a primary driving issue for them.
The youth vote is another X factor. Belt says data shows the war in the Middle East is not their biggest motivator.
It's really not. It's the economy. And just like any other voters 18 to 29, the only voting demographic that Biden won, they're still really concerned about the economy.
Harris is also trying to win over moderate Republican voters, campaigning with former GOP Representative Liz Cheney and appearing on Fox News. In Washington, I'm Brendan Cullerton.
In Missouri, one of the biggest races on the ballot isn't between candidates. Amendment 3 would repeal the state's abortion ban. It went into effect in 2022, just hours after the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade. Since then, abortion rights have been on the ballot in 7 states, including Kansas. Those are the states you see in blue here on this map. Each time, abortion rights have won, even in reliably red states. The 10 states you see here in orange will be voting on the issue this year, and that includes Missouri. Now, this is a complicated issue that brings strong opinions from both sides. KCTV5 is committed to sharing the real stories of women at the center of this debate. We begin with a local mother who's written a book about surviving a botched abortion. She shares her story with KCTV5 investigative reporter Angie Racono.
Melissa Oden is an abortion survivor. You may not be familiar with that term, but it's for people who survived abortions. If you look closely at state data for abortions, they use terms like efficacy, meaning if the procedure worked. Back in 2022, Missouri had a post-abortion complications section in the annual report. Failed abortion, pregnancy undisturbed. It happened 12 times. And it happened back in 1977 to the woman you are about to meet. She was born after a failed abortion.
When I first found out my story, like so many survivors, I was thinking, don't you ever, ever share this story.
Melissa Oden was born premature. She always knew that. She was adopted, and she knew that too. What she didn't know is that her young birth mother had a saline infusion abortion.
There is nothing that prepares you for a moment like that. There's so many questions of how does it happen? Why did it happen? Does that mean I'm so unlovable? I'm so unworthy?
Melissa eventually tracked down her medical records, which clinically spelled out the details. Saline infusion for an abortion that was done but unsuccessful. The baby was delivered spontaneously in a bed by a nurse. Melissa weighed less than 3 pounds at birth.
When I share my story, certain people or media outlets will still say, right, alleged abortion, or she, it was just a traumatic birth.
Melissa is careful about doing interviews. She mostly shares her story on her own terms through testimony and in her book, You Carried Me.
Everybody has a story.
Melissa's story takes around 200 pages to tell. How she learned the circumstances of her birth when she was just 14 years old and then struggled with that information for years. She eventually tracked down her birth parents after decades of searching and then sent her birth father a letter.
My birth father passed away not long after I sent him a letter back in 2007, and I don't know if he knew that I had survived that abortion.
Her birth mother is alive.
She lives in Missouri. My birth mom, Ruth, lives in Odessa. I have a half-sister, Jennifer, and her kids that live in Blue Springs.
Melissa says her birth mother, Ruth, told her she had no idea she was born alive.
There was a pain in her eyes that I will never, ever forget. And if there's one thing I could change about my whole story, it would be her pain. I wish I could take that away from her.
Melissa has strong feelings about Amendment 3. She'll vote no.
So I want people to read through this language and be educated about it, to know what the impact of a yes or a no vote on it would be.
She raises a consequence few people openly discuss. People do survive abortions. She now runs the Abortion Survivors Network, connecting with survivors like herself and providing support.
The number of us who know is very small because it is a family secret and people don't know how to talk about it. And so I think people would be very surprised if we actually knew the exact number of people like me.
And that was Angie Racono reporting. We are covering both sides of this complicated issue. Our reporting continues at 7:34 with women who plan to vote yes and have their own stories to share of abortion access.
So if we don't allow medical abortions, or we're not actually advocating for all abortions, women are going to suffer. Women are going to die.
Alice Ledford has had multiple miscarriages and an ectopic pregnancy. She tells KCTV5 her abortions were heartbreaking and medically necessary. Again, her story coming up at 7:34.
Control of both chambers in Congress could switch hands this election. So let's start in the Senate. Right now, both parties hold 50 seats, with Democrats having the tie-breaking vote in Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, Republicans are optimistic about their chances to take the majority. So let's take a look at the map. There's a lot of seats for Democrats to defend this year. There are 23 up for election compared to just 11 for Republicans. And they have to defend seats in solid red states like Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. But as one expert points out, this group of seats has done well for Democrats during the last few election cycles.
These are senators that won in 2006 when Democrats flipped the Senate in a backlash to President George W. Bush. They were reelected in 2012 when President Obama cruised to reelection. And then they won in 2018 when Democrats had a successful midterm in a backlash to President Trump.
And that brings us to the race in Missouri. Josh Hawley was one of the bright spots for Republicans back in 2018, defeating Democrat Claire McCaskill and flipping the seat for the GOP. Well, now he's locked in a contentious race for re-election against Democrat Lucas Kunce. KCTV5 Sharon Chen caught up with both of them on the campaign trail to see where they stand on the issues important to Kansas City voters.
Social Security, it's a promise from generations before us. You paid into it, you earned it. I'm Josh Hawley, and I'll always fight to protect it.
Josh Hawley.
Because I've spent my life serving Missouri, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, at the Pentagon under President Trump. And Josh has only ever served himself.
And Lucas Kunce, your two choices for Missouri's U.S. Senate. Before Election Day, KCTV5 spent time with each candidate to make sure you have everything you need to know.
All right, Lucas Kunce, you are running against Josh Hawley for Missouri's U.S. Senate seat.
Kunce agreed to a sit-down interview. We made the same invitation to Hawley, but only Kunce agreed to a sit-down. So we caught up with Hawley out on the campaign trail. Both candidates were presented the same questions, beginning with abortion, Amendment 3, one of the top issues on the ballot. We asked, what do you want voters to know about where you stand on abortion?
First of all, it's the right thing to have voters be able to vote on this issue. This should not be an issue for judges. This should be an issue for voters. Listen, I'm pro-life. I believe in exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother.
As U.S. Senator, I'm going to codify Roe versus Wade. And I think people are smart enough to make their own decisions in their lives. If you want to get in vitro fertilization, take care of that. Contraception and abortion, if you need it, it should be up to the family and their doctor.
Moving to a topic we know is top of mind here locally. Kansas City's crime rate remains as one of the highest in the nation. According to crime analysis from data experts at Neighborhood Scout, the chance of becoming a victim of violent crime in KC is 1 in 67, making the city one of the top most dangerous cities in the country. So we asked what the two candidates see as a solution to the problem.
So, we've defunded education, we've defunded all sorts of programs. We've opened up the border to let fentanyl come through like crazy, which creates all sorts of other problems along with it. And it's just we got to make these investments in keeping ourselves safe. And, we need to fully fund police and we need to invest in communities before it gets to crime.
We've got to continue to support our police. We need to pass my legislation to give every cop in Missouri a pay raise and to hire more cops. I've introduced legislation to put 100,000 more police officers on the street. I think that is common sense.
On to one of the biggest topics you've seen back and forth on in ads, the border. So we asked, if elected, what would each candidate do about illegal immigration?
But if you're asking me what my position is on this, I am for closing the border. I want it closed. We've had too many deaths in Missouri. We've had too much crime in Missouri. We've got too many drugs in Missouri from the border, across the border. We just can't afford that.
It's actually pretty simple, right? We got to have fentanyl scanners. We got to stop the flow of fentanyl. The guy I'm running against, Josh Hawley, voted against funding for fentanyl scanners. We've got to fully fund and equip Border Patrol. So, yes, the border's a wreck. There are simple solutions, and we're not doing them.
And finally, from non-citizen voters to delayed mail and more, is election integrity a concern?
No, I think, most people in Missouri sound like they're getting to get out to vote and they feel like their votes are going to get counted. So I'm excited about that.
I'm glad you mentioned this. Yes, I do. I sure do. Migrant workers who are not here as citizens cannot vote under federal law trying to register them to vote. That's just illegal. And I'm glad to see the Secretary of State in the state is doing something about that.
Hawley, as the incumbent, has a clear advantage going into Election Day, and the polls have proven that, with Kunce trailing Hawley. Now, Hawley and Kuntz are the big names facing off, but when you get your ballot, you'll see 3 other names. Nathan Klein with the Green Party, W.C. Young with the Libertarian Party, and Jared Young from what's listed as the Better Party. Sharon Chen, KCTV5 News.
On the other side of the U.S. Capitol, there will be a new Kansas representative in the House. After just 4 years in office, Republican Jake LaTurner is leaving Congress. And now 2 familiar faces in Kansas politics are running to replace him. They are Republican Derek Schmidt, the former Kansas Attorney General who lost a bid for governor back in 2022, and Democrat Nancy Boyda, who actually held this seat for 1 term in the 2000s. In Kansas's 3rd district, Democrat Sharice Davids is running for a 4th term. She's being challenged by Republican Prasanth Reddy, who is a doctor and lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserve. Now, both of these congressional districts were redrawn before the last election. The 3rd district now includes all of Miami, Franklin, and Anderson counties. That puts a lot more registered Republicans inside its boundaries. But that didn't hurt Sharice Davids in 2022. The 2nd district now includes parts of Wyandotte County north of I-70, and Lawrence has been moved to the 1st district, which is represented by Republican Tracy Mann.
With a slim margin in the House already, there's no telling which party will have control after Election Day. Here's how the House looks right now. 220 Republicans, 212 Democrats with 3 open seats. Now, 218 is the number needed for a majority, so as little as 4 flips is all it would take for Democrats to get the gavel back. Experts say it could come down to a handful of close races on the coasts.
The bulk of it is made up of Republicans who are defending seats that Biden won in 2020. A lot of those seats are in New York, in California, and then we have Democrats who are also defending seats that Trump won or Biden narrowly won that are also quite vulnerable.
Here's how our representation in Congress looks right now. Missouri has 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats in the House. Kansas has 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat. All 9 Republicans and 3 Democrats are up for election this year. Now, all 4 senators in both states are also all Republicans. Only Josh Hawley is up for election this year. In 2 years, Roger Marshall's term will end in Kansas, and he has not yet announced whether he will run for re-election or not.
Voters in Jackson County will be picking a new prosecutor. After 13 years, Democrat Jean Peters Baker is leaving the office. Her departure comes at a time when violent crime in the county is at record highs. Fair to say the prosecutor's relationship with the Kansas City Police Department has been rocky at times, but her office says they are filing charges in almost all of the cases they get from police. 2 candidates now running to become Jackson County's next prosecutor. They are Democrat Melissa Johnson, the current director of public safety for Kansas City, and Republican Tracy Chappell, who is running for this office again after losing in 2020. KCTV5's Alex Love asked them both about their plans to get tough on crime.
I have over 24 years of experience.
We're going to hold more people accountable.
The next prosecutor in Jackson County has to convince voters they know how to prosecute effectively.
I've been both a head prosecutor. I've also been a criminal defense attorney, so I am well balanced. I have worked with police officers.
I have brought over $1 million of Department of Justice grant funding to this community. I have drafted new municipal laws, most recently a law that makes it easier for us to impound cars believed to be involved in street racing.
From January through September of this year, Kansas City has experienced over 5,700 property damages, almost 2,000 burglaries, and over 6,000 cars stolen.
We will also be starting a new property crimes prosecution division to help us tackle this issue. This new division will actually partner with law enforcement agencies and deploy prosecutors to the scenes of nonviolent property crimes. I am not playing with repeat offenders.
I would absolutely advocate to have those people sit in jail until their trial. When you have repeat offenders like we're having who are in jail one day and when they get out, they are repeating the crimes over and over again, those individuals must be prosecuted to the fullest extent.
Very nice to meet you all.
In Johnson's plan, the prosecutor's office takes a stronger role in investing in social programs, preventing crime at its core.
We invest combat funds, which are under the requisitioning authority of the prosecutor's office, to the tune of about $30 million annually into things like affordable housing, mental health resources. I even want to start a county-wide mentorship program.
It's community efforts, yes.
Chappell vows to increase the prosecutor's presence at homeowners association and business meetings, promising her team will work one-on-one with you to save livelihoods and ensure you're safe.
When we have trust between the communities and the prosecutor's office, then they can actually come and talk to us. They're more willing and relaxed to talk to us because they know that I am going to get the job done.
Alex Love, KCTV5 News.
Across the state line in Johnson County, Kansas, there will be a new sheriff in town. Current Sheriff Calvin Hayden lost his re-election bid in the Republican primary to his former undersheriff, Doug Bedford. Byron Roberson is the Democrat in the race. He's the chief of the Prairie Village Police Department. Both men have resumes that include decades in law enforcement and service in the military, but their experiences behind the badge are a little different. Both candidates say those experiences make them the best fit for the sheriff's office.
A sheriff's office is completely different than a chief of police or a police agency because of the duties, responsibilities, and what you need to do. There's so many different divisions. There's 12 different divisions within the sheriff's office to include the detention division, which is the largest we have.
There hasn't been an outside person that has run the sheriff's office in decades. And sometimes that's what's needed. They need a new perspective. They need a person that has a new outlook, that has trained outside of the sheriff's office, and I have done that.
Both candidates agree on a few things, including the need for more collaboration with local police departments, and they'd both like to see more of them join the county's drug task force because right now only one city participates.
It is your final chance to get to the polls before Election Day. Coming up, we have the details on the final day of advance voting on both sides of the state line.
Local, live, America decides. This is a KCTV5 News election special.
If you have a mail-in ballot, it's probably too late to send it back. At this point, you probably want to return it to your county election office or a ballot drop box to make sure it counts. In Missouri, mail-in ballots have to be notarized and returned by the time polls close Tuesday. In Kansas, they must be postmarked and mailed by Election Day and can be counted as long as the Postal Service gets it to the election office by 5 p.m. Friday. During the primary back in August, about 1,000 mail-in ballots in Kansas were not counted because the post office did not deliver them in time. The state's top election official is encouraging voters to avoid the mail after November 1st.
If you're hoping to vote in person before Election Day, tomorrow is your last chance to do that. The election offices in Kansas City, Clay County, and Platte County will be open from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. The Jackson County sites in Independence and Blue Springs are open 8:30 to 5. And on the Kansas side, the Johnson and Wyandotte County election offices will only be open from 8 in the morning until noon. Now, before you head to the polls, check out the KCTV5 election guide. We have a breakdown of all the local races on both sides of the state line, plus what you'll need to take along with you to the polls so that everything goes smoothly. And you can find it on your KCTV5 News app now.
There are a number of big races on the Missouri ballot. So coming up, KCTV5 hears from both candidates running for governor. And we break down 2 amendments that are getting a lot of national attention.
Local, live, America decides. This is a KCTV5 News election special.